Welcome to the Deep Dive, the only place where we take your stack of reading material, the policy documents, the research reports, all that detailed economic analysis, and really boil it down to the critical insights you need.
And today, we're doing an especially deep dive. We're really moving past the headlines to focus on the foundational concepts, the strategic mechanisms driving growth in one of the world's, largest and most dynamic economies.
That's right. Our mission today for you is to quickly and thoroughly unpack this pretty comprehensive stack of sources covering India's economic machinery. This material gives an exceptional look at how policy is structured, from grassroots social welfare right up to the blueprints for these massive multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plans.
Yeah, huge scale.
And all this while having to navigate, the extremely challenging global economic waters we've seen over the last few years.
Absolutely. And the central idea, the thing linking every document you sent over, is inclusive growth, IG. The World Bank has a good definition, emphasizing it's not just about the pace of development, how fast GDP climbs.
Right, the headline number.
Exactly. But also, crucially, the pattern of development. And the key insight is that these two, pace and pattern, they're really tightly linked. You can't sustain the pace long term if the pattern isn't right.
So this is way beyond just raw GDP figures then. We're talking about who benefits, how they benefit, and if that benefit is, structurally sound, sustainable.
Precisely.
We're going to cover the domestic policy model, this idea of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, then get into the nuts and bolts of the massive infrastructure push. That includes the complex world of PPPs, public-private partnerships, and asset monetization.
Tricky stuff there.
We'll look at how global shocks are putting constraints on local policy. And finally, check out the critical shifts happening in India's labor pool, especially the rise of the care and gig economies. It's a packed agenda, so let's dive into that core mission first.
Okay, let's unpack this core idea first. Inclusive growth is the North Star for India's economic strategy. We need to know what that actually looks like. What are the fundamental characteristics according to these sources?
The sources are very clear on this, setting out 9 key features. Think of it as a checklist for inclusive development. We can group them a bit. First area is economic access. You need equitable opportunity.
Meaning?
Meaning genuinely equal market access. Actively removing those structural barriers that hold back marginalized groups.
Okay, makes sense. And that feeds directly into the second point, the ultimate goal, right? Poverty reduction.
Exactly. Targeting poverty not just by, hoping income rises, but through solid social safety nets and guaranteed access to essentials like education and healthcare.
Got it. And the quality of the jobs matters too. Hugely. That's feature 3. Comprehensive employment. It insists on creating productive, decent jobs, especially for underprivileged groups. Right. We're not just talking about soaking up unemployment with low-wage, dead-end work.
Right, quality jobs.
Then, number 4 deals with the social fabric. Social inclusion. Ensuring everyone participates, women, minorities, people with disabilities, active participation.
Okay, that covers the people side. Then there's the environment and geography.
Yes. Number 5 is sustainable development, a really intense focus on environment-friendly growth strategies, super critical for a developing nation vulnerable to climate shocks.
And closing the regional gaps.
That's 6, regional balance. Actively working to shrink those huge disparities we see between states. The gap between a high HDI state like Goa and a lower one like Bihar, for example.
Big gaps there.
And the final 3 are about making the system work. 7 is participation and empowerment, encouraging real stakeholder involvement in policy. 8 is access to services, ensuring health, education, finance are reliably there for everyone.
And finally,
number 9, good governance. Promoting transparency, accountability, efficiency. Basically making sure the public administration can actually deliver on all these goals.
That list is a great diagnostic tool. But focusing on sustainability, number 5, that seems critical. The sources kind of imply a tough choice here, don't they? Especially for developing economies. Does chasing green growth sometimes clash with the immediate need for fast poverty reduction, number 2?
You've hit on the core tension. That's the heart of this middle path approach mentioned in the sources.
Explain that a bit.
Well, if a country just relies on old polluting industries for quick output, it racks up this huge environmental debt, right? And that debt has to be paid later, often hitting the poorest hardest through climate disasters, health issues.
So the Parsia model tries to avoid that.
It tries to leverage technology to leapfrog those old models. So the focus isn't just on, say, more coal plants, but on massive, rapid rollouts of solar power, green hydrogen initiatives.
But that costs more upfront, surely.
It's an initial capital investment, yeah, definitely not the cheapest option short term. But the idea is that it ensures long-term sustainability doesn't end up undermining poverty reduction down the line. It prevents future costs, essentially.
That makes sense, a long-term view. Okay, now let's look at why this is so urgent. The sources detail some pretty alarming inclusion gaps. Where are the biggest problems right now?
We see major deficits across really 4 fronts: economic, social, financial, and gender. Starting with economic inclusion gaps, the issue isn't just overall output, it's the massive regional disparities.
Like the Goa Bihar example.
Exactly. The sources specifically contrast states like that on HDI. And per capita income, the gap can be huge, several times over. Plus, you've got a staggering percentage of workers stuck in informal jobs.
Which means no security, no benefits.
Precisely. No safety net, limited access to formal credit. It's precarious.
And that informality links to the social inclusion gaps, especially in human capital.
Directly. The sources point to a severe public service deficit as the real structural problem here. We're seeing only about 2% of GDP spent on health, maybe 4.6% on education.
That seems low.
It is, by international standards. And you see the human cost immediately, which hurts future productivity. The data points are quite stark. High rates of childhood stunting, cited at 35.5%, and underweight children at 32.1%.
Wow.
If your foundational human capital is compromised by malnutrition, poor education, well, that hobbles the productivity of the entire economy. It's not just a social tragedy, it's a major economic drag.
Okay, shifting to finance. The financial inclusion gaps seem less about just having a bank account now, given Yandan's success, right? It's more about capability.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
The core problem highlighted is low employability, largely due to a widespread skills mismatch. People might have bank accounts, that's financial access, but if they can't earn a stable formal income,
They can't get loans.
right.
Yeah.
They lack the collateral or the consistent cash flow needed for formal credit, so they're locked out of investment, entrepreneurship, basically upward mobility.
And finally, the gender inclusion gaps. Still a major issue.
Absolutely fundamental, both for household well-being and national productivity. India's score on the Gender Inequality Index, the GII, it's still poor, reflecting deep structural issues. And despite some recent progress, the female labor force participation rate, FLFPR,
Still low.
still low compared to global averages, yeah. Cited at 34.7% in the latest PLFS data for 2024. These gaps represent a huge pool of untapped economic potential that the strategy has to tackle head-on.
Which brings us right to that national strategy, the Bharatiya model of inclusive development. The sources emphasize this isn't just copying models from elsewhere, it's grounded in India's own context. How does it translate those 9 goals into policy?
Well, it champions this middle path approach. It's trying to chart a careful course between, say, ultra-capitalism, where the market dominates everything, and a heavy command-and-control state economy.
So a balance.
A balance, yeah. Integrating private enterprise and market forces, but with selective, targeted government intervention. Stepping in to fix market failures, support the vulnerable. You see this balance in things like using PPPs for infrastructure, but also building digital public infrastructure like UPI or ONDC.
So not purely hands-off, but intervening pragmatically where it's needed.
Oh.
And the focus seems to be on the most marginalized first, that Antyodaya principle.
Exactly. The model focuses intensely on Antyodaya and empowerment, caring for the most disadvantaged first. And leveraging technology is key here, ensuring benefits reach the bottom without leakage.
Like DBT.
Precisely. Using direct benefit transfer, DBT, enabled by the JAM Trinity, that's the Jan Dhan bank accounts, Aadhaar digital ID, and mobile connectivity. This digital plumbing lets schemes like the PM Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, the Free Food Grain Program, deliver aid directly, cutting out middlemen, improving efficiency.
And the overall framework is described as holistic and pragmatic. What do those mean in practice?
Holistic means seeing social welfare and economic growth as 2 sides of the same coin, totally integrated. You can't have one without the other sustainably. Economic stability has to build social stability.
And pragmatic.
Pragmatism is maybe the most crucial operational bit. It's about constantly adjusting policies based on real-time data, feedback from the ground, making sure things actually work in reality, not just on paper. Using things like the Aspirational Districts program to tailor interventions locally, integrating growth, inclusion, sustainability in areas that need it most.
Okay, that focus on holistic growth, it needs a massive physical underpinning, right? The sources stress that achieving inclusive growth demands huge investment in the composite backbone, physical stuff like transport and power, digital like telecom, and social like health and education.
Absolutely. Infrastructure is probably the single most critical lever for sustained economic growth. The sources kind of break down the government's strategy into a clear, three-pronged approach. It's designed to coordinate new investment, unlock value from existing assets, and make sure it all actually gets built smoothly.
Let's start with the new investment side. The scale is just mind-boggling.
That's the National Infrastructure Pipeline, NIP. This is the big one. A 5-year commitment targeting a colossal 111 lakh crore investment that's over 1.3 trillion US dollars for FY20 to FY25.
And its job is basically to identify projects.
Yeah, its specific goal is to create this massive pipeline of projects that are technically feasible and financially viable. It gives a clear, bankable roadmap for both government spending and, importantly, private capital.
Okay, then there's the funding side, or part of it, the National Monetization Pipeline, NMP. The source makes a really big point here. This is not privatization. That distinction seems vital.
It's a critical nuance, yes, and one that, as some critiques point out, needs very careful explanation to avoid misunderstanding. NMP is about unlocking value from existing operational brownfield assets.
Things already built and running.
Exactly, like highways already collecting tolls, operational power lines, maybe telecom towers, assets that are already generating revenue. The idea is to lease them out temporarily, usually for a fixed concession period, maybe 20 or 30 years. This is estimated to unlock around 6 lakh crore over 5 years.
Okay, so if a private company manages, say, a national highway for 30 years, they collect the tolls, handle maintenance, take the operational risk, how does the government ensure they don't just let it fall apart towards the end? If they still own it, how is accountability maintained?
That's all built into the concession agreement. It's the key. The NMP isn't selling the physical asset, it's selling the right to operate it and earn revenue from it for that period.
So contracts are key.
Very key. The private entity has to stick to strict performance metrics, often called KPIs, key performance indicators. These cover maintenance schedules, service quality, safety standards. They're legally binding with penalties for noncompliance. The private operator is incentivized to maintain the asset properly because if they don't, they face penalties. And crucially, when the lease ends, the asset has to be handed back to the government in a pre-agreed condition. So the government retains ultimate ownership and sets the standards while transferring the operational and maintenance risk and, importantly, getting upfront cash.
That seems like a smart way to generate funds for the NIP without actually selling core assets. Okay, so we have NIP for new projects, NMP helping fund them. How does the government stop different ministries, roads, railways, ports from working in silos and messing things up?
That's the job of the third pillar, the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan. Its whole purpose is coordination and logistics efficiency. Historically, infrastructure projects suffered badly from these departmental silos, right?
Yeah, the road gets built, then dug up for pipes.
Exactly. Gati Shakti aims to break those silos using a centralized digital platform. It's got spatial planning tools, dynamic analytics.
So it's like a master blueprint overlay.
Pretty much. It ensures integrated planning, multimodal connectivity. It brings together 16 different ministries or departments onto one platform covering 7 key economic zones. So before a new port project gets the green light, Gati Shakti tools can analyze the best routes for rail and road links, where warehouses should go, even potential housing for workers. It brings optimization and synchronization.
Right. Now, funding all this. Public money alone isn't enough, given the scale and fiscal constraints. Which brings us to public-private partnerships,
Yeah.
PPPs. Beyond just bringing in cash, what else do PPPs offer that simple government contracting doesn't?
PPPs are vital, yes, for private capital, but also for bringing in management efficiency, sometimes more innovation in design or technology. And crucially, they shift the focus from just building an asset to guaranteeing a certain level of service delivery over the long term.
You see that in practice.
Definitely. Think about the modern Delhi airport or the efficiency gains at Mundra Port. Those are often cited as PPP successes, where the focus is on performance and user experience, not just the physical structure.
Now, the sources break down 3 main PPP models. Understanding the differences seems key, as it's all about Who takes what risk and how money flows? Let's start with the classic one.
The traditional model is BOT, build, operate, transfer. Here, the private partner finances, builds, and operates the asset, say, a highway for a long period, often 20, 30 years. Their main revenue comes directly from users, through tolls or charges.
So the big risk for them is?
Traffic volume risk. If fewer cars use the road than they projected, their revenue drops and they could lose money. That was a major issue in some early BOT projects.
Okay, then the opposite end seems to be EPC, engineering, procurement, construction. This sounds like much lower risk for the private side.
Very low risk, yes. Here, the government basically covers 100% of the project cost and takes on most of the associated risks, things like land acquisition delays or unexpected cost increases. The private company acts more like a contractor.
They just build it and hand over the keys.
Pretty much. They design and build the facility, then transfer it to the government upon completion. It removes almost all financial risk for the private player, making it suitable for maybe more complex or socially sensitive projects where the government wants full control later.
And finally, the one designed to fix the problems of BOT, the hybrid annuity model, HAM. How does that 40-60 split really help the private partner avoid that traffic risk you mentioned?
HAM is quite clever because it shares the risk more evenly, which makes projects much easier to finance, more bankable. Here's how it works. The government pays 40% of the project construction cost during the construction phase, linked to milestones being met.
Okay, so cash flow help up front.
Exactly. It provides immediate liquidity. Then, the remaining 60% is financed by the private entity. The government pays this back as a fixed, regular payment and annuity after the project is completed, usually over 15 or 20 years.
And that payment is fixed.
That's the crucial part. It's fixed, regardless of how much traffic the road actually gets. This takes away that huge revenue risk from uncertain traffic volumes that plagued many pure BOT projects. It provides revenue certainty, making banks much happier to lend.
Makes sense. But even with these evolved models, PPPs still face big challenges that slow things down. The sources mentioned the Vijay Kelkar Committee recommendations quite a bit. What were the main external problems they identified?
A major external headache is project delays caused by things outside the contract, like unexpected judicial orders on land use, environmental clearances stopping work. The source mentions the mining ban in Goa as an example that stalled many unrelated PPP projects.
Creates huge uncertainty for investors.
Massive uncertainty. You can have your financing lined up, everything ready to go, and then a court order freezes everything for years.
So regulatory and legal uncertainty is a killer. What fixes did the Kelkar Committee propose for this legal logjam?
They focused on institutional fixes. They recommended a clear, overarching national PP policy. Also, setting up independent regulators for specific sectors like roads, ports, to bring domain expertise and consistency.
And for disputes.
Crucially, to speed things up, they recommended setting up a dedicated infrastructure PPP adjudication tribunal. The idea was to take these complex commercial disputes out of the regular court system, which is already overloaded, and get faster expert resolution.
I also see a focus on fixing the contracts themselves, prioritizing service outcomes over just how things look on the government's books.
Absolutely. And they really stressed customizing risk allocation based on who can best manage a specific risk. This is the core risk allocation principle. Give the risk to the party best equipped to handle it.
For example,
the government is usually better placed to handle land acquisition risk or political risk. The private sector is typically better at managing construction efficiency risk or operational risk. The key is avoiding a rigid, one-size-fits-all contract structure, which was a big flaw in earlier PPPs. Tailor the contract to the project.
Okay, let's pivot now. We've gone from the grand vision of inclusive growth down to the specifics of building roads. Let's zoom back out to the bigger economic picture. The sources paint a picture of, well, a world full of uncertainties that directly constrain what India can do domestically.
Yeah, the global context over the last couple of years has been, frankly, historically tough, dominated by high commodity prices, persistent geopolitical risks, Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East tensions. All that kept global inflation stubbornly high.
And that meant central banks everywhere hiked rates.
Exactly. Interest rates stayed high across advanced economies, especially the U.S. Federal Reserve.
And this global reality creates a direct problem for the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI. It's often called the monetary policy bind, or the policy trilemma, right?
That's it. What's interesting, or maybe challenging, is that growth in places like the U.S. stayed pretty strong despite their high rates. The bind for India is straightforward. Ideally, the RBI might want to cut domestic interest rates to encourage investment, help fund that big NIP we talked about. But if U.S. interest rates remain high, any significant rate cut by the RBI risks triggering massive capital outflow. Money would just flow out of India seeking those better, safer returns in the U.S.
So the RBI's hands are tied.
To a large extent, yes. This potential capital flight forces the RBI to keep domestic rates higher than it might otherwise want, just to maintain stability. It impairs its ability to run an independent monetary policy purely focused on domestic needs, like boosting growth or creating jobs.
So if the RBI keeps rates high, mainly to match the U.S., they risk slowing down domestic borrowers, right? Like small businesses, people wanting home loans, even state governments needing to finance their share of infrastructure. Is there evidence in the sources that this bind is actually biting right now?
Oh, absolutely. That subdued gross fixed capital formation, GFCF, figure mentioned for H1FY25, that's investment, is often linked directly to this. When borrowing costs stay elevated because of global factors, private companies will naturally postpone big investment plans.
Makes projects less attractive.
Less attractive, harder to finance. But maybe more importantly, the source notes that this high global rate environment also pushes up the yield on Indian government bonds. This makes it significantly more expensive for the government itself to borrow the huge sums needed for its own infrastructure spending.
So it's a negative feedback loop?
Kind of, yeah. High U.S. rates force high Indian rates, which increases the cost of public borrowing, which could potentially slow down the very infrastructure engine the government wants to accelerate. It's a real balancing act.
Okay, let's focus on India's domestic performance now, using that standard aggregate demand framework, AD=C plus G plus XM. We know investment I was a bit soft. What about government spending and fiscal management?
The sources really stress the importance of fiscal discipline here. They bring up that key macroeconomic identity, SI=GT plus XM.
Break that down for us.
Okay. S is savings, I is investment. So SI is the domestic savings investment gap. G is government spending. T is tax revenue, so GT is the fiscal deficit.
Yeah.
And XM is exports minus imports, basically the trade deficit or the current account deficit, C.
And why is managing this identity so critical?
Because if the domestic savings investment gap, SI, widens too much, maybe savings fall or investment demand surges, that gap has to be financed somehow. It's financed either by the government running a bigger deficit, GT, or by borrowing from abroad, which shows up as a wider current account deficit, XM.
So if the government isn't careful,
If the government lets its fiscal deficit, GT, blow out while the SI gap is wide, it puts enormous pressure on financing the current account deficit. That can lead to instability, maybe sharp currency depreciation, makes imports expensive. It's generally bad news. The sources credit reasonably judicious fiscal management with preventing that SI gap from widening too much, despite all the global pressures.
okay, let's talk revenue then, the T part. The tax numbers seem a bit contradictory at first glance.
Yeah, it needs a careful look. We saw pretty strong gross tax revenue growth, cited at 10.7% year-on-year, which reflects decent economic activity. But the net tax revenue, the money the central government actually keeps after sharing with the states, that was reported as flat.
Why the difference? Poor collection.
No, not poor collection. The flatness was attributed directly to increased tax devolution to the state governments. It's a constitutional requirement, part of India's fiscal federalism. The center collected more, but it also had to share more with the states, leaving its own net share looking flat.
Got it. So it reflects the federal structure. Finally, on the macro side, the sources mention a big change in how GDP itself has been measured since 2015. Why was that shift needed? What did it fix?
This was a major overhaul, yeah. It's done partly to align better with international standards, the SNA 2008 framework, but also, crucially, to improve the data's credibility and coverage. The old method relied heavily on something called the Annual Survey of Industries, ASI.
Which focused mainly on
The industrial sector, manufacturing specifically. But India's economy has become much more services-driven. The old method was kind of missing a big chunk of the picture, or at least underrepresenting it.
So what did they shift to?
They shifted to using the MCA21 database. This is the database from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which collects data from registered companies.
And the benefit of using MCA 21.
It's a treasure trove, really. It captures actual financial data from balance sheets, profit and loss statements of formally registered firms across all sectors, including that fast-growing services sector.
So it gets rid of the manufacturing bias.
Exactly. It provides a much more diverse, representative, and hopefully accurate sample of economic activity. It gets away from relying just on surveys for the corporate sector. Alongside this, they also shifted the base year for calculating constant price GDP from 2004-05 forward to 2011-12 to better reflect the current structure of the economy.
Okay, so we've covered the policy aims, the infrastructure build-out, the tricky macro situation. But what does all this mean for the average person? For you, the listener, as a worker, the sources show some really interesting, maybe complex trends in the job market.
Yeah, the labor market story is fascinating. We've seen significant recovery after the pandemic, but also some major structural shifts. One of the most striking trends is the big jump in self-employment.
More people working for themselves.
Significantly more. The proportion of workers classified as self-employed went up from about 52.2% back in 2017-18 to 58.4% by 2023-24, according to the PLFS data cited.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of the workforce. Now, is that a good sign, more entrepreneurs, or is it more like disguised unemployment, people doing it because they can't find formal jobs?
It's likely a mix, always complex in India, but the sources seem to lean towards it being, on balance, a positive trend, or at least showing positive momentum. It does reflect growing entrepreneurial activity, maybe a preference for flexible work, especially post-COVID. And importantly, there seems to be a shift away from the really precarious casual wage labor category towards more structured forms of self-employment, often helped by things like microcredit schemes.
Interesting. And related to that, the sources highlight a really positive trend, something that gets a lot of attention. The female labor force participation rate, FLFPR.
Yes, the FLFPR has shown a pretty remarkable increase over the last 7 years or so. It climbed from a low base, admittedly, around 23.3% up to 41.7% by 2023-24.
That's a big jump. What's driving that?
The growth is significant, yeah. It seems primarily driven by rising participation among rural women, often linked to targeted entrepreneurship schemes like Mudra Yojana, Skill India initiatives, and maybe the whole self-help group movement. These are creating more opportunities for self-reliant livelihoods that women can manage alongside household responsibilities, often locally.
Okay, good progress there. Now let's turn to what feels like the new frontier of work, the gig and care economies. The sources define two main types of gig work changing the urban landscape.
That's right. We need to distinguish between platform workers, those who use digital apps like Zomato, Swiggy, Uber, Urban Company to find work, and non-platform workers.
Who are they?
Those are more like your traditional freelancers, consultants, or even casual workers who find jobs through informal networks, not through a specific app. The gig economy overall is significant now. It acts as a kind of flexible shock absorber for the labor market, offering quick entry, high flexibility.
But, and it's a big but, the sources also flag some serious risks with this model, sometimes called the precariat.
The risks are definitely profound, often related to intense work pressure and income instability. The data cited is worrying. 60% of platform gig workers apparently work all 7 days a week, often needing multiple shifts just to hit earnings targets.
And the pay isn't great.
Income volatility is a huge issue. About 50% reportedly don't earn the equivalent of minimum wage after you factor in their costs, fuel, vehicle maintenance, data charges. Plus, there's the whole challenge of algorithmic asymmetry.
Meaning the platform holds all the cards.
Yeah, pretty much. The platform's algorithm controls ratings, incentives, work allocation, even deactivation. The worker has very little visibility or control, and they're vulnerable to sudden policy changes by the platform, often with no real way to appeal.
So the policy response has to balance that flexibility people want with some basic protection. The government outlined this RAISE framework under the new code on Social Security. How does RAISE try to thread that needle?
RAISE is meant to be the strategic guide for actually giving Social Security benefits to these workers without classifying them as traditional employees, which would kill the flexibility it stands for. Recognize the diverse nature of platform work.
Right.
Allow augmentation of Social Security using innovative financing. Incorporate the interests of the platforms themselves, support workers in subscribing to government schemes, and ensure the benefits are actually accessible and portable.
I want to pick up on that innovative financing. How exactly would that work for gig workers who might juggle multiple platforms or work irregularly? How do you fund their Social Security?
That's the million-dollar question, the key regulatory challenge. The source suggests this innovative financing would likely involve contributions not just from the workers themselves, but also from the platforms.
A levy on the platforms?
Potentially, yeah. Maybe a small percentage levy on each transaction value. This could create a central fund that subsidizes Social Security contributions for things like health insurance, accident cover, maybe even pension funds for gig workers.
Without making them employees.
That's the goal. It preserves the flexible nature of the work, which both platforms and many workers value, while creating a portable safety net funded collectively. It's complex to implement, but that seems to be the direction.
Okay, moving to the other emerging sector. The care economy, defined as activities meeting physical, psychological needs, child care, elder care, domestic help. Why is this suddenly getting so much policy focus instead of just being seen as, unpaid work done at home?
Its importance is exploding due to three big interlinked factors. First, simple demographics. India's population is aging. We're heading towards an inverted care pyramid by maybe 2050, where there are more elderly people needing care than younger people to provide it informally. That requires massive investment in formal elder care.
Right, the aging population. What else?
Second, the motherhood penalty. We see that dip in female labor force participation when women have young children. Often, highly educated, skilled women drop out of the workforce or take lower-paying flexible jobs because affordable, quality childcare isn't available. That's a huge economic loss.
And third, there's actual economic value in formalizing care.
Exactly. It's not just a social cost, it's a potential economic engine. The sources estimate that if public investment in good, accessible care services goes up, the care economy could actually add something like 2% to GDP globally and create millions of formal jobs, many for women.
So moving it from informal to formal.
Yes. Recognizing it as essential infrastructure. Government steps mentioned include upgrading Anganwadi centers to function as proper creches, daycares, under Mission Shakti. It's about seeing childcare and elder care not just as private family matters, but as public goods that enable wider economic participation, especially for women.
Okay, let's look now at the two big productive sectors of the economy, manufacturing and services. And we see a pretty clear divergence here in performance and challenges. The manufacturing sector currently makes up about 17% of India's gross value added, or GVA.
With that long-standing national ambition to get it up to 25%.
That's the target, yeah. A big jump that requires tackling some deep-seated structural issues.
What are the main things holding Indian manufacturing back from being more globally competitive, according to the sources?
There are several key breaks on the system. First, a high incremental capital output ratio, ICR. It's cited at around 3.5.
Explain ICR simply. High is bad. High is inefficient, yeah. Basically, it means that for every 3.5 of new capital invested in manufacturing, India currently gets only about 1 of additional output per year.
Ouch, compared to competitors.
Successful manufacturing economies, places like Vietnam or historically China during its peak growth, often have I-cores much lower, maybe closer to 1 or 2 inefficient sectors. So India's high I-score means capital isn't being used very productively, which tends to make finished goods more expensive.
A fundamental disadvantage. What else?
Second, there's still heavy import dependence in crucial areas. The example given is pharmaceuticals. 72% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the core components of medicines, are imported. That creates supply chain vulnerabilities.
Right, we saw that during the pandemic.
Exactly. And third, there's relatively low investment in research and development, R&D, only about 0.64% of GDP, and a lot of that is government spending, not enough private sector R&D. This holds back innovation, moving up the value chain, improving product quality.
So how is the government trying to tackle these deep issues and boost manufacturing?
The main weapon is the PLI, Production Linked Incentive Scheme. This targets 14 specific sunrise sectors, things like semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, specialty steel, medical devices.
How does PLI work?
It basically offers companies financial incentives, cash back essentially, based on their incremental sales of goods manufactured in India compared to a base year. The idea is to encourage global firms to set up shop locally or existing firms to scale up production significantly and quickly.
And there was another scheme mentioned.
Yes, the PM MIPRA scheme. This is focused specifically on the textile and apparel sector. It aims to create mega integrated textile regions and apparel parks. Basically large, dedicated industrial zones with world-class infrastructure power, water, logistics, testing labs, all in one place to create competitive ecosystems.
Okay, so that's manufacturing facing challenges, but with targeted support.
Yeah.
Now, in sharp contrast, the service sector, still the main engine.
Very much so, contributing around 55% of GVA and showing really robust growth, especially in IT and related services. The sources highlight the massive scale here. IT services revenue in FY24 was around USD 254 billion.
And exports are huge.
Huge. Tech exports alone hit about $200 billion. But beyond just the headline numbers, the sources point to the rise of a specific structure, Global Capability Centers, GCCs.
GCCs, what exactly are these?
These are essentially offshore hubs set up by large multinational corporations to handle a wide range of their own internal business functions. It started mostly with IT support and back office stuff, but now it's expanded massively.
What kind of functions?
High-value work.
Yeah.
Finance and accounting, R&D, engineering design, data analytics, supply chain management, HR services. Basically, these GCCs act as strategic centers for the parent company based in India.
And there are a lot of them.
Over 1,700 GCCs now, employing around 1.9 million people. It's a massive high-skill industry.
Why is India such a magnet for these GCCs? Why here?
It's really a combination of factors that's hard for competitors to replicate. You've got the huge pool of high-quality STEM talent, something like 23% of the world's software engineers are here. Combine that with significant cost advantages compared to the West, favorable time zones for round-the-clock operations, and increasingly stable digital infrastructure.
And they're moving up the value chain.
Definitely. They're shifting from just doing routine tasks to core research, product development, innovation hubs for their global parents. It really underscores India's role as a global tech and capability powerhouse, not just a low-cost destination.
Okay, finally in this section, a major digital innovation aimed at making commerce more inclusive. ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce. This sounds like a potential game changer because it challenges the big platform monopolies.
ONDC is a really ambitious idea. It's designed to be a democratic, open-source, interoperable network for digital commerce. Think of it like UPI, but for buying and selling goods and services online.
Interoperable means?
It means different platforms can talk to each other. So imagine you're using one shopping app, but you could see and buy products listed by a small seller who uses a completely different, maybe local app. ONDC provides the common technical standards, the protocols to allow that.
So it breaks down the walled gardens of the big platforms.
That's the goal. To empower small sellers, give them wider reach without needing to be solely dependent on Amazon or Flipkart or whoever. It levels the playing field, potentially reduces commission costs, and combats that algorithmic asymmetry we talked about in the gig economy by making the network open and transparent.
And it's not just for ordering groceries anymore.
No, it's expanding fast. The sources mention the ONDC Financial Services integration launched in August 2024. This brings things like personal loans, insurance, mutual funds onto the network.
How does that work?
It integrates with existing digital infrastructure like lending apps, the account aggregator framework for sharing financial data securely, DigiLocker for documents. The idea is to create a low-cost distribution channel for financial products, spur innovation, and give small businesses on the network easier access to credit and other financial services. It's knitting the digital ecosystem together.
Okay, we'll wrap things up by looking at a couple of specific policy tools the government uses to manage resources and push for that inclusion goal. Let's start with the proposed GST 2.0 reforms. Big changes possibly coming to the goods and services tax.
Yeah, GST 2.0 seems focused mainly on simplification and rationalization. The current system, with its multiple slabs, is seen as quite complex. The main proposal discussed is scrapping the existing 4 main rates in favor of a much simpler 3-tier structure.
What would the new rates be?
The proposal mentioned is 5% for essential goods, a standard rate of 18% for most items, and then a higher rate, maybe 40%, reserved for luxury goods or sin goods like tobacco or maybe luxury cars.
That simplification sounds good for consumers and businesses, maybe helps compliance too. But are there specific benefits aimed at those core growth or inclusion goals we discussed?
Yes, the proposals mentioned include specific relief measures, things like exempting or applying the lowest rate, 5%, to life-saving medicines. And importantly, for the rural economy and agriculture, the plan apparently includes moving things like agricultural machinery and irrigation equipment down from the current 18% slab to the 5% slab.
That would directly lower costs for farmers.
Exactly. Directly supporting agriculture by reducing the cost of essential inputs and modernization.
But simplification like this, especially potentially merging some middle rates into 18%, must have fiscal consequences. What's the main challenge with these reforms, especially introducing that high 40% slab?
The big challenge, as always with tax reform, is the potential impact on government revenue, at least in the short term. The sources estimate a potential revenue loss risk of around 48,000 crore annually from this rationalization.
That's a significant chunk of change. How do they manage that?
It requires a two-pronged approach. First, ensuring there's a transparent and reliable mechanism to compensate states for any revenue shortfall, as many state governments are heavily reliant on their share of GST. Second, the hope is that the simplification itself will lead to significantly better compliance and potentially widen the overall tax base over time, eventually offsetting the initial revenue dip. But managing that transition is key.
Okay, makes sense. Our final policy mechanism to discuss is gender budgeting, GB. The sources mention this as a fiscal innovation India introduced way back in 2005-06. Now, it's not a separate budget for women, right? So how does it actually work to promote gender equality?
That's right. It's not a separate pot of money. Gender budgeting is more of a fiscal strategy or an analytical tool. It's designed specifically to promote gender equality and women's development by analyzing how government spending already impacts women and girls across all sectors.
So it's about tracking the money.
Tracking and analyzing, yes. It involves performing an annual exercise that identifies how much of the government's expenditure across various schemes and departments is allocated towards programs that primarily benefit women and girls. The goal is to ensure that government spending actively contributes to gender equity outcomes.
And the sources mention a specific three-part structure in the annual gender budget statement. How does that enforce transparency?
That structure is key for accountability. It mandates ministries to classify their spending relevant to women. Part A includes schemes where 100% of the allocation is specifically for women or girls. Think scholarships for girls, maternal health programs.
Okay, fully dedicated spending.
Part B covers schemes where at least 30% of the allocation is estimated to benefit women. This might include broader programs like rural livelihoods or skills training where women are significant participants, but not the sole beneficiaries.
And Part C?
Part C reflects schemes where the allocation specifically benefiting women is less than 30%. This whole structure forces ministries to actually think about and report on the gender impact of their spending. It makes gender considerations a mandatory part of the fiscal planning and reporting process, moving beyond just good intentions. #OutUTRO. So this deep dive, it's really given us a panoramic view, hasn't it? From the overarching ambition of inclusive growth, through the massive infrastructure build supported by these complex PPP models, navigating the tightrope of global macro pressures, and that monetary policy bind.
Yeah, and then right down to the fundamental shifts happening within the workforce. The rise of self-employment, the gig economy, the growing importance of the care economy.
It's definitely a story of rapid change, immense potential, but also inherent complexities and tensions, especially between that pace of growth and the pattern of who benefits.
Absolutely. And as we look at the workforce trends, particularly that surge in self-employment and the gig model, the sources leave us with a final, pretty provocative thought. It stems directly from the accelerating pace of technology.
That thought really centers on what might be the primary challenge for a labor surplus country like India going forward: job displacement driven by technology, especially AI and automation.
The numbers are stark.
They are. The sources cite ILO estimates suggesting 75 million jobs globally could be at risk from automation in the coming years. And surveys within India indicate a majority of employers, maybe 68%, expect jobs in their own companies to be significantly exposed to AI automation fairly soon. The gig economy could be particularly vulnerable here.
And this raises a huge question, right?
Yeah.
Especially because, as the sources hint, the speed of AI development seems to be massively outpacing our ability to create regulatory frameworks for it. Plus, technology adoption often tends to widen existing economic divides, rewarding the highly skilled, displacing the lower skilled.
Precisely. So the fundamental question left for you, the listener, to really chew on is this. Given that this shock from AI on the labor market seems pretty much inevitable, what foundational inclusive institutions beyond just basic reskilling programs do we need to start building now?
Institutions to manage the transition.
Exactly. Institutions that can effectively mediate that shock, ensure the huge productivity gains from AI are shared broadly and equitably, and don't just deepen the existing inequalities. How do we build a safety net, an opportunity structure that protects and empowers the potentially displaced worker of tomorrow, not just today? That's the real deep dive to consider moving forward.
Powerful food for thought, indeed. Well, thank you for sharing your source material with us today. It's been fascinating to unpack. And thank you, our listener, for joining us for the deep dive.